amazing powers were revealed to Prince Adam of Eternia when he opened his closet and saw that all he had was pink vests and tight white t-shirts. No, that's not really how the story goes. Amazing powers were revealed to him the day he held aloft his sword, Excalibur, sword of the power sword. Yes, He-Man's power sword. The source of his power. The sword that magically transforms him from skinny little Prince Adam into bulky, huge He-Man. Okay, well, in the Filmation show, he wasn't as skinny. But he was skinny in 2000X, which was the original concept. Filmation just needed to save money by reusing animation and recoloring it. But that's not important right now. Today, on this video on the Spectra Creative channel, with me, your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, who have been in the toy industry for about 20 years as a designer, marketer, and collector, we're going to talk about the magical transformation between Prince Adam and He-Man and exactly how it works. How is it that he can hold up a sword and scream, "I have the power," and suddenly become this buff super guy? Well, for starters, there's been a lot of versions of He-Man over the years. Like, a lot of versions. And because there have been so many versions, to say that there are some contradictions in the storyline and how things work is barely scratching the surface. And the deeper you go and the more versions of Masters of the Universe you look at, even if you go back to the very original storyline in the mini-comics, you just start to see things that not only contradict each other, but just, well, make no sense. You know, how did He-Man go from being in a jungle tribe to being this guy with an electronic sword in 2000X? Or this guy, you know, the super sexy version of He-Man from the 1980s, Dolph Lundgren. Roar. Let's sigh. All right, so in order to solve all of this, ideally, when we did Masters of the Universe Classics, which was the toy line I brand managed during my decade or so with Mattel, the idea was to create a definitive story that could at least bring all of this together. The idea was really to sell the most amount of toys, but this is what we came up with. So in the beginning, there was a wave of energy that created the universe. This energy wave was captured by the overlords of Tralla, that's Orko's people, and was fused into a sword that they called the Sword of He being the Trallan word for power. The sword was stolen by an evil Trallan called the Unknown One, or Gorpo, and the good Trallans were able to stop him. But now what to do with the sword to stop people, bad guys, from getting it? Well, they needed a hero. And they got a hero. This guy. Hero. So they gave him the sword because he was true of heart and all of that and super brave, and he went throughout the galaxy doing brave things until he wound up on planet Eternia, where he gave his life to protect King Grayskull. And in his dying words, he deemed King Grayskull worthy of being his heir and passed the Sword of He, infused with the power of the universe, to King Grayskull, who would be the new guardian. And King Grayskull used this sword to do heroic things, like cut off Hordak's arm and other things. But the sword was too powerful for even King Grayskull, being infused with the power of the universe inside of it. So what was he to do? Well, first thing, they wanted to do the right thing and, give a proper funeral to his best bud Hero, who had brought the sword to Eternia. And it was decided at the funeral that a castle would be built in order to house the power of the universe, to protect it. So this power, which became known as the power of Grayskull, was hidden inside of a giant castle, which at first, when it was built, was white and gold and beautiful and gleaming and looked brand spanking new. There it is in the background there. It's kind of hard to find images of this. It's only in that 2000X series, episode 35, The Powers of Grayskull, is where you see the castle in its original form. And over years, grease and lime and moss and age turned it green, kind of like the Statue of Liberty, which was originally bronze. And the power from the sword was transferred from the blade into an orb. So this orb now held the power of the universe inside of it, but the sword could still connect with it because it was what originally brought the power to Eternia. So the sword can tap into the power, but the power itself is held inside of a power orb, which is now hidden in the depths of Castle Grayskull to prevent evil from getting it, like what happened with the Unnamed One when he tried to get it on Trala. In time, King Grayskull passed, and he was remembered as a great hero of Eternia, and statues were built to him. And inside of the castle, which now bore his name, the Orb of Power was stored deep below in a crystal cavern. See it in more detail here underneath the central chamber, the throne room of Castle Grayskull, where the sorceress, as the guardian of the castle, and this is, of course, the sorceress being a title that gets passed on from generation to generation, starting with Grayskull's wife, Vina. So you can see that crystal chamber was shown very prominently in the 2000X series. There was a big fight between the sorceress and King Hiss in this chamber, and it's where she hangs out and, taps into the power of the universe in order to protect the castle. All right, so we got the power of the universe hanging out in the castle, but what about the sword? So the sword, because it could tap into the power of the universe, the orb now, was separated and split in two. You had a good side and a bad side, or just the fact that there were two. This was to incorporate the two-sword concept. And throughout the generations, different warriors protected the sword of He. Remember, He being the Trollan word for power. And they became known as the He-Men. So anyone who was protecting the two halves of the sword of He would be a He-Man, a protector of the sword. Sometimes they'd be brought together to defeat some giant enemy, and most of the time kept separate and secret. So Vicor was one of them. He was the one right after King Grayskull. After many centuries, another prominent one was Wundar, who also was a He-Man, a protector of the sword of He. And then the final protector was the warrior from the Jungle tribe, which in classics we named Ular. So this was a way of incorporating the original concept from the mini-comics into a full Masters of the Universe Classics continuity. So he became the final guardian, the final He-Man, before the true He-Man would emerge. And Ular was tasked with bringing together both swords, which had been split for centuries, and now combining them again into one, so that this one power sword could be passed on to the person most deserving of it in the whole world, Prince Adam. So the orb, meanwhile, still inside of Castle Grayskull in its little orb holder, and we actually did a couple different orb holders in the Classics line, some that fit into different passages in the castle and others that came with action figures like the sorceress. The orb is still there, and now the sword is combined into one unified blade, once again, as it was when Hero brought it to Eternia and the power of the universe with it. So the sword is bequeathed to little skinny Prince Adam, who takes the sword from, well, not exactly from a magical anvil. He's, just given the sword. But the point is, he gets the sword, and he now has to accept his destiny because he is an actual descendant of King Grayskull, as opposed to many of the other He-Men throughout the years were just brave warriors that were tasked with guarding the sword. Prince Adam, as the true He-Man, raises it above his head, says the magic words, Shazam! And lightning and thunder and all the power of Thor and Asgard wirelessly connect the sword, I mean, not literally wirelessly, but, we know the way wireless works, with the orb inside the castle. And the power of the universe can transfer from the orb into the sword, which once held the power. If you recall, it was originally created to contain the power by the overlords of Trala. And the sword channeling the energy transforms Adam into He-Man. Now, there is a continuation of the story, and this was something actually the Four Horsemen had pitched for the 2000X series, where Skeletor was going to get both halves of the sword and combine them into one, which meant that Prince Adam, He-Man, no longer had the sword and no longer had the ability to transform into He-Man because Skeletor captured both halves. So here you see Skeletor in the 2000X line as sculpted by the Four Horsemen, holding what was the light or good side of the sword, the bronze one, and then the purple one was meant to represent the evil half when there was a good and evil half. Again, lots of different versions, lots of continuity. But the concept that they pitched was that he was going to combine the swords, and this was the original power sword. This was changed, and this sword just became Keldor / Skeletor's sword in the show, not the original power sword. But that's also why the Horsemen redesigned He-Man's power sword as an electronic sword. And we incorporated this into classics by essentially saying that when Skeletor did capture the sword in the future, future meaning a few months, Man-at-Arms had to build an electronic version of the sword that could also harmonize with the power of Grayskull, or the power of the universe in that orb. And the sword could also do neat other little parlor tricks as well. But unlike the original sword, which harmonized with the orb through mystic connections, this was doing it through electronic connections. Also a way to incorporate the whole mystic and electronic, mechanical themes of Masters of the Universe. And that's a whole other video. So while there are many, many iterations of He-Man, and what's now even been called the Masterverse, because so many of the versions contradict each other, Masters of the Universe Classics attempted to at least bring them all together to have one cohesive story. We're still getting future stories like Netflix Masters of the Universe Revelation, and we'll see how that fits in too, and what their take on the power sword is. Will it incorporate concepts created by the Classics line? I guess time will tell. But I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad we had a line to explain how all this comes together. If you like this video and want to see more, let me know in the comments below. Subscribe. Give it a thumbs up. That tells YouTube to share this with other people, and that's kind of the whole idea, is to share fun toy knowledge. Thanks for watching.